Welcome to Greek for a Week. I'm glad that you have decided to view this week's video. And this week we are looking at Philippians 4, 10 through 14. We will be diagramming this particular paragraph this week. And as we look at the text as a whole, all four of these verses, or I should say 5 verses, again, as we're looking at these, I want to, again, just to reiterate that I typically do almost every week, is there are various components in the text. And as we look at those various components, it could be a verbal form, it could be an adjective, it could be a noun, it could be a prepositional phrase. So as I look through those each week and then bring it all together in something similar to this as a diagram, again, the point is to show the relationships between phrases, even down to the very words themselves, but between phrases and even between verses, and how 10 relates to 11 and 12 and so forth. What's the purpose of the de? And so as we see how this plays out, my goal and my hope is that not only will you learn these relationships and the grammatical and syntactical forms, but then at the end, how might I teach this particular paragraph or preach it so that I am being honest with the text. So let's get started. Verse 10. Again, he says now, and I'm suggesting here that the de that begins verse 10 marks a transition to a new section. So now I rejoiced in the Lord greatly. Why did I do that? Hati, because, or there's a causal function of hati here, because now you have revived your concern of me. Indeed, with regard to which you were thinking of me, but you lacked opportunity to show it. So I'm suggesting then verse 10, really the rest of this here flows from I rejoiced in the Lord greatly. Again, not that, and so I'm suggesting here the hati is one of content. Not that I speak according to need, okay? Why? I think the gar here is causal, because I myself, emphatic form of ego here, or the emphatic form of the pronoun, personal pronoun, because I myself, what has happened? Well, I have learned. And then you could say, well, learned what? How do I complete that thought of learning? Well, I've learned to be. There's a complementary infinitive. To be specifically content where? In the circumstances where I am. I know. Here's a form, the perfect indicative form of oida. I know how to live in humble circumstances and how to live in prosperity. So the kai here shows us 2 different scenarios for Paul. He says now in all circumstances, which I think these any and all circumstances, it does 2 things. It describes these 2, humble and prosperous, but it also pushes forward to say in any and all circumstances, what? I'm taught. Well, I am taught again. For what reason? I am taught to be satisfied. I am taught to be hungry, to be in abundance, and to be in need. So that's a complementary infinitive, and I apologize that that's not in there real well there. That should be moved over so that the 2 ands are below one another here. So I apologize for that. But right here, the wording is a complementary infinitive. So these 4 complementary infinitives do just that. They complement the idea that he's been taught. Then you come down here, and then right here's the famous verse that seems to be quoted quite often. I can do all things. Okay, well, those things, what are they? Well, not only are they the things that I just mentioned above, okay, which I think that's the context in which we're discussing here. I think it's all of these various circumstances that Paul finds himself in, again, whether they're circumstances of prosperity, circumstances of humility, whatever they are, hungry, satisfied, in need, in abundance, I can handle all those. I can go through all of those. How? Well, through the means, n plus the dative, through the means of who? Him who strengthens me. And that would be a substantival participle, which the one who strengthens me for sure would be Christ. And then verse 14, nevertheless, you now have done well by, and I'm suggesting this is a participle of means, by sharing in my afflictions. So again, I think verses 10 through 14, as they're packaged together, I think we can go ahead and move forward with this kind of a teaching outline. So what can we learn from Paul? What's interesting here is it makes it a little bit difficult to break this text down because there are so many first person singular verbs that Paul is using in reference to his situation, which is why I've titled this paragraph Paul's circumstances. So what can we learn from Paul? I think one, we can be grateful for others' work on our behalf. That's why Paul rejoiced, because they, even though they could not help necessarily, they saw the need and they did what they could. We can also be content with what we have. That's what Paul learned. He said that I am content in whatsoever circumstance I find myself in. Also, be satisfied with your circumstances. That's where Paul says, you know what, I was taught or I learned how to handle all of these situations. So I think also we can be satisfied with the ones that God places in our path. And then lastly, I think he's just simply saying, hey, you are equipped. You, Philippians, you, believers in Christ, you are equipped because you have the ability, as Paul was, to be strengthened by the one who strengthens you, and that is Jesus Christ. Trust this has been helpful for you. A little bit of a difficult passage because of Paul's interactions with his circumstances, and I think really it's more, what can I learn from Paul and his reaction and action that he walked through, specifically his circumstances. Have a great week.